Whoever printed this badge owes you an apology, because it isn't getting you through my gate." The words dropped through the checkpoint like a blade waiting to fall. 19 soldiers on gate duty went still. A radio crackled somewhere on a belt clip, and nobody reached to answer it. The guard shack's window fan kept turning, the only motion left in a scene that had otherwise frozen solid. Beyond the barrier, a line of vehicles idled, engines ticking in the morning heat, drivers craning to see what had stopped the checkpoint cold. Somewhere overhead, a hawk circled the fence line once, indifferent, and kept going. Colonel Grant Hollis stood with his hands on his hips, service ribbons stacked 4 rows deep across his chest. The posture of a man who had commanded Fort Kestrel for 6 years and had never once been told no by anyone who mattered. His shadow fell long across the gate lane, over her boots, over the visitor badge in her hand, and he let it sit there while he decided how long to enjoy this. 19 soldiers watched. None of them moved to intervene. None of them moved at all. The gate smelled like diesel exhaust and hot asphalt, the particular smell of a checkpoint that had been baking under a desert sun since sunrise. A young private manning the visitor terminal kept his eyes fixed on his screen, saying nothing. The specific nothing of someone who has decided silence is the safest position available in a situation he doesn't control. Somewhere behind the guard shack, a flag snapped once in a gust of wind and went still again, as if even the air had decided to wait and see how this played out. She was 32. A plain gray blazer, a visitor lanyard with no rank insignia printed anywhere on it. Hair pulled back tight enough that it looked less like a style and more like a decision, smaller than every man at that gate and considerably stiller. Her badge read Compliance and Clearance Verification, Department of Defense, a title bland enough to be forgettable, which was exactly the point. Her hands held the badge without a tremor, fingers steady the specific way of someone who had held far heavier things under far worse circumstances than a colonel's ego at a checkpoint. "This clearance code doesn't match anything in our visitor system," Hollis said, loud enough for the whole line of cars to hear. "Either headquarters sent me a paperwork error, or somebody handed you a badge you don't understand how to use." "The code is current as of this morning," she said. "Not loud. Not fast. I'd recommend verifying it before you decide it's wrong. I don't take verification lessons from a visitor." He smiled for the soldiers behind him, the kind of smile built to invite an audience to smile back. Especially not one who shows up alone with a laminated card and expects my base to roll over for it. A ripple of laughter moved down the gate line. Not everyone, but enough. Low, ugly, the kind that spreads because nobody wants to be the one who doesn't join in. "Run the verification," she said. "It'll take 4 minutes. 4 minutes of my morning I'm not getting back." He checked his watch, playing to the row of idling cars behind her like they were a courtroom gallery. "Turn around. Come back when someone competent signs off on this." She said nothing else. She breathed. 4 counts in, hold 4. 4 counts out, hold 4, and stood exactly where she was. Her primary response to disrespect was absolute stillness. No raised voice. No second argument. It unsettled the gate more than a fight would have, because nobody standing there had a script for a woman who simply refused to move or react. Near the guard shack, watching from just inside the doorway with a clipboard he wasn't really reading, Command Sergeant Major Walter Higgins stood with the specific patience of a man who'd been at this gate, in one capacity or another, for most of 33 years. 63 years old. Career military. The kind of career that included postings nobody ever asked him to elaborate on. What stopped his pen mid-motion was the way she'd held that badge. Not defensively, not nervously, just level. the exact grip of someone who had been trained to hold documents that mattered a great deal more than a visitor pass. He'd seen that grip exactly once before in his career, and the man holding it that time hadn't survived the year. Hollis turned back toward the guard shack, already savoring the laugh he'd earned, already certain the matter was settled. He didn't notice the visitor system behind him quietly finish its actual verification, unread, confirming a clearance level that outranked his own by several tiers he didn't have the access to see. He didn't notice that her calm wasn't defeat. It was patience, running on a schedule only she could see. "Exactly the clearance my orders say I have," she said, when a young specialist finally logged her name for the gate record. Nobody caught the quiet weight sitting underneath the sentence. Then she stepped back to wait, exactly as still as she'd been the whole time. The audit that had brought her to Fort Kestrel wasn't random. The clearance discrepancy Hollis was so certain of was a trigger she'd built herself 6 weeks earlier. Specifically so a man like him would react exactly the way he just had, publicly, loudly, on record, in front of 19 witnesses. The financial thread she'd been pulling on for 3 years had started with a single overstated maintenance write-off at a depot in Georgia. A few $1,000s of ordnance logged as scrap that never actually left the inventory as scrap. It had taken 18 months to connect that write-off to a shipping broker in the Gulf states, and another year to trace the broker's buyers back through 2 shell companies to a network already known to federal investigators for arming exactly the kind of militia that had ambushed her team 5 years earlier. Every step of it had to survive scrutiny from auditors who weren't looking for her at all, only for the money. A paper trail disguised as bureaucratic tedium, hiding in spreadsheets nobody wanted to reread twice. She built the compliance officer cover specifically because nobody double-checked a bored federal auditor with a clipboard. That had always been the point of it. She'd spent 4 years chasing an arms diversion network that had, 5 years ago, put compromised ordnance into the hands of a militia that ambushed a 6-man precision team in a valley she still saw when she closed her eyes. Her spotter, Sergeant First Class Daniel Cole, had died in that ambush beside her, close enough that she still remembered the exact weight of him. The investigation that followed had been thin, rushed, and quietly closed within a month. Someone with real authority had wanted it closed. She'd spent every year since finding out who benefited from that speed. Tonight the trail led to Fort Kestrel's armory manifests. Tonight it led to a colonel who'd built his post into something considerably more profitable than his salary explained. She didn't yet know exactly how deep his greed ran. She was about to find out the same way the rest of the post would, all at once and without warning. By mid-morning, the story of the gate had already outrun the actual event. Barracks gossip added details that never happened, that she'd tried to bribe a private, that she'd cried when Hollis turned her away, that headquarters was already drafting her termination. Somebody nicknamed her the Laminated Lady before lunch. By 1100, half the post thought they understood exactly who she was, and every single one of them was wrong. In the mess hall, a table of junior NCOs traded the story for the 3rd time that morning. Heard the colonel told her to turn around and get back in her rental car. One of them said, grinning around a mouthful of eggs. Heard she just stood there like a mannequin the whole time, another added. And the table laughed the way people laugh at a joke they've already heard twice and decided to enjoy anyway. One soldier, younger, newer to the post, didn't laugh with them. She'd been on gate duty that morning, close enough to hear the actual exchange. And something about the woman's stillness had stuck with her longer than the colonel's punchline had. She didn't correct the table. She just kept eating, watching the door, half expecting the woman from the gate to walk through it and prove everyone wrong all at once. "You think she's really faking a clearance?" The younger soldier finally asked, mostly to herself. Visitors always are. Eventually, someone answered, not unkindly, just tired, repeating a rule of thumb none of them had ever actually tested. None of them had any idea they were describing, without meaning to, exactly how invisible she'd needed them to believe she was. She spent the late morning in the visitor lounge outside the provost marshal's office, technically waiting on her verification, actually working. She listened to who came and went from Hollis's staff meetings, who left those meetings looking relieved, and who left them looking hollow. She watched two logistics NCOs avoid eye contact with each other in a hallway, the specific kind of avoidance that comes from shared guilt rather than simple dislike. She filed it all, building a second map of the post that had nothing to do with its official org chart. The competence clues surfaced quietly across the morning, the kind only a trained eye would catch. She read a duty roster upside down through a window, correctly, from 12 feet away, faster than the soldier holding it could read it right side up. She identified a passing major's unit by the wear pattern on his boots, before she'd glanced at his name tape. When a support beam outside the visitor center groaned under a maintenance crew's scaffolding, she was the only person in the courtyard who didn't flinch, already calculating load angles out of habit before anyone else had registered the sound as a problem. Her jacket sleeve rode up once, reaching to hold a door for an elderly veteran signing in for a benefits appointment. A scar showed along her forearm. Not surgical, not clean. The kind that comes from a graze, close enough to have been fatal by inches. She declined a cup of coffee offered by a sympathetic clerk with a single sentence. Black, no sugar, only ever had it that way in the field. Delivered so plainly nobody in the room registered it as a clue, though Higgins, passing in the hallway, heard it and filed it anyway. At 11:40, a fire alarm test in the visitor center malfunctioned into an actual lockdown trigger, sealing 2 emergency doors and trapping a facilities technician on the wrong side of a stairwell. 2 duty soldiers fumbled with an override panel neither of them had ever actually used. She crossed the lobby without being asked, reset the panel through a sequence that looked rehearsed because it was, cleared the doors in under a minute, and stepped back before anyone thought to thank her. Higgins, watching from the far side of the lobby, wrote the timestamp down without comment. Under a second wave of gate gossip that afternoon, her expression didn't change once. Not distracted, not annoyed. Exactly composed, the kind of composure that comes from years of training the reaction out of your own face until nothing shows there you haven't chosen to show. Higgins saw all of it. His pen kept stopping. He said nothing yet. He was building a picture in silence, the way 3 decades of service had taught him to build every picture that eventually mattered. That evening, off-duty, he mentioned her in passing to another sergeant major he'd known for 15 years, over coffee neither of them finished. Not by name. He didn't have one worth using yet. Just a description. The badge grip. The lockdown reset. The stillness that didn't crack. Sounds like somebody who used to carry more than a laminated card, the other sergeant major said. Or still does, Higgins said, and just hasn't told this post yet. Neither man said the word underneath that conversation. Neither needed to. Men who'd spent 3 decades around rooms like that one learned to recognize the shape of a secret long before anyone confirmed its name. By early afternoon, Hollis had convinced himself the gate incident had been a headquarters stunt designed to embarrass him personally. By 1500, he decided to make sure nobody on his post ever forgot who actually ran it. He picked up his desk phone and opened a formal credential fraud inquiry against her. The kind of paperwork built to end careers quietly and without much of an appeal process. He didn't open it because he believed the fraud was real. He opened it because her audit request, if it proceeded on schedule, would put her inside his armory's outbound manifest exactly 4 hours before a shipment he'd falsified as scrap ordnance rolled out his back gate toward a buyer who paid considerably better than the Army did. 3 years of siphoned crates, logged as corroded and unusable, had bought him a second house near the coast and a lifestyle his colonel's salary could never have covered on its own. Her arrival hadn't just embarrassed him at the checkpoint. It had nearly caught him with the truck already loading. The mockery at the gate had been genuine arrogance. The fraud inquiry was something else entirely, a man protecting a scheme, dressed up as a man protecting his post. 2 hours later, 2 MPs escorted her to a visitor processing room, not under arrest. They were careful to specify, just pending resolution of the credential matter. The tone made clear it was very much not just a formality. The processing room was small, government beige, and smelled like old carpet cleaner. An MP staff sergeant sat across a table with a legal pad. Hollis stood by the door, arms crossed, enjoying himself. "Where did you obtain the clearance code you presented at the gate?" the staff sergeant asked. "Official issue. This morning." "Issued by whom?" "Above your access to confirm. That's not going to satisfy this inquiry. It's the only answer available to you tonight." "Why request the Armory manifest specifically?" "Instinct. And 5 years of practice." "Practice at what?" "Patience. You expect me to accept that as an answer?" "I expect you to check the badge before you decide anything else." The staff sergeant glanced toward Hollis, half looking for permission to push harder. Hollis just crossed his arms tighter and said nothing, certain the woman across the table was bluffing her way through a fraud she'd already been caught committing. 4 in. Hold 4. 4 out. Hold 4. She let the silence occupy exactly as much space as it needed to. "You understand this looks like credential fraud," the sergeant said. "It looks like whatever you've been told to make it look like." They took her visitor badge. They took her phone. She surrendered both without a flicker of protest, without anything showing on her face that resembled a woman losing control of the day. Everything about her suggested a woman who had accounted for this exact outcome weeks ago and planned around it precisely. Hollis watched from the doorway, satisfied, already composing the version of this story he'd tell at the next commander's conference. Something flickered across his face when she handed over the badge without argument, not doubt yet. Just a small, self-congratulating certainty that he'd won. And underneath that, a relief he wouldn't have named even to himself. The truck would clear the back gate on schedule. That was all that mattered to him tonight. He had no idea he'd just triggered the exact sequence she'd spent 5 years building him toward. By early evening, she sat in a holding room 9 feet by 11. Cinderblock walls painted the color of weak coffee. A single narrow window near the ceiling, showing a strip of darkening sky. A steel chair bolted to the floor. The smell of industrial cleaner failing to cover something staler underneath it. This wasn't theater. This was the plain, unglamorous machinery of an inquiry that had gone exactly one man's way for exactly one afternoon, and for the first time since the gate, there existed a version of this story where it didn't resolve in her favor. This is the near-fail moment. The point where anyone watching from outside would assume she's finished. Credentials pulled. Phone confiscated. A colonel already rehearsing his victory lap. Except games have rules, and she was about to remind this entire post that they'd been playing a completely different one without realizing it. She let herself think of Cole for exactly 1 minute, the way she rationed herself to do, and never any longer. The way he used to hum off key through long waits on Overwatch. The photo he kept of a dog he never got to bring home from that deployment. The bad coffee he used to trade for better coffee and always lost the trade anyway. 5 years she'd carried this, through 3 false leads, 1 burned cover identity, and more rooms like this one than she cared to count precisely. This holding cell wasn't an ending. It was closer to the final page of a chapter that had started the day the radio went silent in that valley. Her watch was still on her wrist. Nobody had thought to take it. That, more than anything, was the detail that mattered, if anyone in that building had known to look for it. Not decorative, not standard visitor issue, the kind of watch built to survive things. She checked it. 1847, not late, not early. Precisely on schedule, mapped 6 weeks earlier down to the hour on a whiteboard she erased every night, so no one would ever see the whole plan at once. In 18 minutes, an intercept team would stop the outbound truck at the depot's rear gate, holding manifests that wouldn't match a single crate inside it. In 47 minutes, a dead man's protocol she'd triggered the moment her badge was confiscated would auto-transmit a complete evidence package to the Army Criminal Investigation Division and the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, whether she checked in to stop it or not. In approximately 90 minutes, this entire post was going to go into a security lockdown Colonel Grant Hollis had never once authorized and would have no ability to override. Not fear. Not doubt, just arithmetic, finally arriving at its due date. She closed her eyes. Patience, running out its last careful lap. Higgins pulled her personnel file that evening, not the visitor file everyone else had access to, but a request log showing 2 prior inquiries into her background, both returning nothing usable. No civilian employment history before 3 years back. No education record that matched the way she'd read that duty roster upside down. 33 years in uniform had taught him what an empty file actually meant. It never meant there was nothing there. It meant somebody with real authority had made certain nothing showed. He found Hollis in the hallway outside the processing room, reviewing the fraud paperwork on a clipboard, looking pleased in the specific way of a man who believes his worst afternoon is already behind him. "I'd think very carefully before you sign that, sir," Higgins said. Quiet, final. "She's a visitor who got caught running a fake clearance code," Hollis said, not looking up. "That isn't what I said." Hollis kept walking. He didn't understand yet that the sentence behind him wasn't advice. It was the only warning the one man on this post who might have spared him this humiliation was ever going to offer. And he just spent it without noticing it had been given. At 2015, 3 unmarked sedans came through the main gate without stopping at the checkpoint the way visitors were required to. A senior SID agent named Reyes rode in the lead vehicle, a man with 18 years in federal investigations, and an expression that had stopped registering surprise long ago. Beside him, a younger agent kept a sealed evidence case that never left his hand. Behind them, a 2-star general's staff car followed close enough to suggest rank, not courtesy. By 2018, the duty officer ran into the provost marshal's office, pale, repeating words nobody on that post had expected to hear that night. "Sid is here. A general is with them, and they've triggered a full post-security lockdown effective immediately." Gates sealed. Perimeter doubled. Every checkpoint that had waved cars through all week suddenly running full identification checks. The exact scrutiny Hollis had refused her that morning, now blanketing his entire command at once. Not a routine visit. Not a courtesy call. The kind of arrival that says this is official business at the highest level, happening whether the post understood it yet or not. 52 people filled the provost marshal's building by the time the agents and the general walked in. MPs, staff officers, the duty NCOs who'd processed her that afternoon, even a maintenance crew pausing in the hall to watch through the glass. Word had traveled faster than the sedans. Hollis stood near the front desk, already pale, already understanding on some animal level that the last several hours had gone somewhere he hadn't planned for. The general crossed the room without acknowledging him. 2 stars. A walk that had ended other men's careers before dinner. He went straight to the holding room door, where an MP had just released her, and waited while she rolled up her sleeve. Nobody in that building breathed while he waited. Who else is watching this and wondering how many quiet, competent people they've written off without ever once checking? The tattoo sat on the inside of her forearm. Small, precise, dark against her skin. A stylized eagle over crossed rifles beneath a single star. The insignia of a designation that existed on exactly one document above nearly everyone present's clearance level. Higgins, standing near the back, went rigid the instant he saw it. His hand started toward a salute before his conscious mind caught up to what his instincts had already confirmed. Not obedience. Recognition, arriving a half-second ahead of belief. Agent Reyes spoke a designation into the silence, low, almost respectful. A classified program name rather than a person's name. An old warrant officer standing near the wall, silent all evening, went pale at the sound of it and set his coffee down like it had turned to glass in his hand. He'd heard that designation exactly once before. In a briefing sealed the same week it was delivered, the room detonated. Not literally, but it felt that way. Someone's binder hit the floor. The slap of it against tile cracked through the stillness like a gunshot. The building's vac hum, background noise all evening, suddenly sounded deafening, the only thing left standing in a silence too total to hold on its own. Somewhere in that stillness, a boot scuffed linoleum, a chair leg scraped concrete an inch, nobody quite meaning to move it. A pen rolled off a desk and clattered for what felt like twice as long as it should have. Small sounds filling a silence with too much weight to hold on its own. The general raised his hand first. Crisp, formal, his wrist locked at the correct angle for a full second before he lowered it. Then, Agent Reyes did the same. Then Higgins, saluting because he'd chosen to, not because any regulation required it of a sergeant major toward a visitor. Then the MPs. Then the staff officers. Then the maintenance crew still standing in the hallway, saluting through a pane of glass because the moment demanded it of them, even from there. 52 people in that building, and 52 hands rose in answer to something none of them had understood an hour earlier. Not a courtesy. A correction, decades overdue, arriving all at once. Hollis didn't move. Couldn't. His face cycled through disbelief, denial, and something that looked disturbingly close to fear. Hours earlier, he'd told her to turn around at his own front gate in front of 19 witnesses. Now 52 people were watching him try to remember how to stand at attention in front of the woman he'd humiliated there. Every person in this building, including myself, answers to her authority, the general said. His voice carried without needing volume. Major Alana Marsh, United States Army, Task Force Solstice. Her clearance predates your command of this post by 4 years, Colonel. And her investigation into this armory predates it by considerably longer than that. Not gossip anymore. Not a nickname passed through barracks group chats. A name, a rank, and a designation spoken aloud in front of every person who had laughed at that gate that morning. Hollis tried to salute. His hand hovered, unable to fully commit, somewhere between denial and terror, until the general's stare corrected him without a single word. He went quiet, not theatrical. Quiet in the specific, hollowed way of a man realizing the ground he'd stood on all afternoon had never actually been there. Colonel Grant Hollis, Agent Reyes said, stepping forward with a folder stamped classified red. "You're being detained on suspicion of unlawful diversion of government ordnance and obstruction of a federal investigation." No shouting, no dramatics. 2 agents flanked him, not roughly, and walked him out at a pace that felt almost gentle given everything that had led up to it. Justice, when it finally arrived, was almost bureaucratic in its quiet. A folder, a signature, a hallway full of people who 12 hours earlier had laughed along with him and now couldn't hold his eyes. Somewhere behind that quiet, 6 years of command, a pension, and the next decade of his life folded down into a single line on a federal charging sheet. He said nothing. There was no one left in that room who would have listened. She didn't watch him go. She was already speaking with the general, already asking about the buyer identified only by a partial license plate photographed outside a warehouse 3 states away. Someone who had moved crates but never once shown his face on camera. He doubted her clearance. He forgot clearance was never the thing that actually gave her authority. By midnight, the evidence package her protocol had already transmitted was unraveling 2 more names tied to Hollis's diversion scheme: a supply sergeant at a depot in Georgia and a private contractor with access to a rail manifest nobody had thought to double-check. Agent Reyes called it the fastest case he'd broken open in a decade. Marsh didn't call it anything. She was already reading the next file. Not celebration. Just the next name on a list 5 years in the making. 1 entry shorter than it had been that morning. Fort Kestrel would spend the next several weeks quietly rewriting the story of that gate, the way posts always did, sanding the edges down until it was easier to tell. Some would say they'd always suspected something about the laminated lady. Most would simply stop mentioning it. The way people stopped mentioning things they got embarrassingly wrong. She wouldn't be there to hear any of it. By the time the official inquiry closed its first phase, she'd already be somewhere else, under some other name, waiting at some other gate for the next thread in the pattern. That night, she sat alone at the edge of the post's old airfield, watching a wide desert sky burn from orange into deep violet over the runway lights, her watch reading 22:47 in the fading glow. Silence is a weapon, too, and she'd spent 5 years learning exactly how to wield it. The warehouse photograph was still open on a folder beside her. 1 partial plate. 1 blurred figure loading a crate at 2 a.m. A name that hadn't surfaced yet. Somewhere out there, whoever he was, he believed the trail had run cold the way it had for 5 quiet years. He was wrong about that. The same way Hollis had been wrong. The same way certainty always runs out ahead of the truth it never bothered to check. She thought of Cole, not with grief tonight, with something closer to a promise kept a little further along. 1 name down. More defined. The list on her screen was shorter than it had been that morning, and that had always been the only scoreboard that mattered to her. Somewhere in a locked evidence room 3 states away, a second name from that list had just gone from unknown to pending, and pending was the closest thing to hope her line of work ever handed her. Somewhere behind her, boots crossed the gravel. Higgins, unhurried, stopped a respectful distance away and didn't sit. He gave her a nod, not the kind regulation required, the kind a man gives when he's decided on his own authority that someone has earned it. She returned it, just as small. 2 career professionals agreeing, without a word between them, that some debts get repaid in silence rather than speeches. Tomorrow brings new names to the list. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to MVP Stories for more.